right, so I'm on with Patrick Davitt. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me today.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure to be back, Letty. Love your podcast, love following everything on social media, and happy to be here to help answer some questions and hopefully bring some guidance and wisdom and shed some light for a lot of your listeners.
I am sure you will. And with that, I kind of want to just establish your credibility and background. So maybe tell us a little bit just about what you do and how you really know your stuff when it comes to this.
Sure. I'm a tenured associate professor at St. Joe's University in Philadelphia. I run the exercise physiology program there. I'm going into my 14th year of full-time faculty. My PhD's in nutritional physiology and biochemistry. I did my postdoc at University of Connecticut under Dr. Jeff Volek, studying low carbohydrate diets, ketogenic in elite ultra endurance athletes. Most of my research is based around energy metabolism, fat metabolism, endurance, ultra endurance. I was the head sports nutrition for Rutgers football for a total of 6 years. I'm an accomplished ultra runner myself. I have a 100-miler Eastern States in 2021 under my belt. I actually can share now. I just signed up for a 200-miler. So I don't just follow and read the science. I practice what I preach, and I'm seeing things out on the trail, not just in the textbook.
I love it. So we're in good hands when it comes to this topic about being a marathoner and fueling and the whole notion of fat adaptive versus carb loading prior to your running and all that stuff. But before we get into all of that, let's talk about the definition of what fat adaptive means and what we're going to be talking about, meaning fueling prior to running or not.
Sure. Yeah, the idea of, there's a couple terms, but fat adapted means your body's ability to burn fat as a fuel very efficiently. And part of that efficiency comes with this idea of metabolic flexibility, meaning at rest, almost all of us are burning primarily fat as fuel. Doesn't matter, assuming you didn't just eat a huge meal, but at rest, we're burning mostly fat. As we increase intensity, our body shifts from fat towards carbohydrate. Someone who becomes more fat adapted is having the ability to burn more fat as that exercise intensity goes up. So let's say you were running, a 7-minute mile and you were burning 50% carb, 50% fat. If you become more fat adapted, now at 7-minute mile, you'll be able to burn 60% or 65% of your calories from fat, and only 35 or 40% from carbohydrate. So you're becoming more, having the flexibility and ability to burn more fat as a fuel to fuel, your muscles during a run.
Okay, perfect. And I want to just take one little step back just to make it super, super clear what we are and what we're not talking about. Talk about fat burning as we run as a means of weight loss versus carb burning. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so that's a great question and probably the biggest confusion point. I spent, when I graduated with my PhD in 2013, I started my postdoc. We were waiting for the FASTER study, fat-adapted substrate oxidation to train elite runners, right? That was like my postdoc. I spent that whole year obsessed with energy balance. And when we talk about energy balance, we really mean fat balance. So when someone says I'm fat adapted, that's just acute. Like in this moment, what is my body's ability to burn fat? Most of the time we could reference it at rest, but most of us are really interested in that as we exercise. The idea of fat loss, which is really when someone says, hey, I want to be, I want to lose weight. I'm hoping a lot of us don't want to lose muscle. If you have 100, 150 pounds, sure, you can stand to lose some muscle mass. But when we say weight loss, we really mean fat loss. You can't look at that. And that's what a lot of people do, and it's wrong. And I don't like saying that, but it's wrong to only look at, oh, I'm becoming fat adapted. I'm burning a lot of fat. That must mean I'm losing weight. At the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is 24-hour energy balance. So fat balance. How much fat did you burn today? how much fat did you take in? If you burned more fat than you brought in, you just lost body fat. We don't even really care about that on a day-to-day basis. It's really a week basis. In the exercise world, we don't really care about volume of exercise in one day. We do if we're like like managing your training. But we care about a weekly volume. So the difference is if I'm fat adapted, it's just my body's ability of burning fat right now. How many grams of fat per minute am I burning? If I want to lose fat, it's all about energy balance. It's all about caloric intake and caloric expenditure. And at the end of the day, it's not even just that, because we could burn off, 1,000 calories worth of, or even 2,000 calories worth of glycogen, stored carb. And we could say, oh, well, at the end of our day, I burned, 3,000 calories and I brought in 2,000 calories. So I must have lost a pound of fat. And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. You're going to recoup that entire 1,000 calories of glycogen. So it's really fat balance. And we can only look at that in the lab doing body composition. And if you can get like stabilized substrate, you can do all these fancy stuff looking at overall fat balance. But the easiest would be to just look in a weekly basis. It's not just body weight. If you have a scale, or you can go to a place that can do body composition. If you can't, then start looking at like pinch, we do skin folds. Look at the arms, look at the chest, look at the waist, look at the hips and the glutes. Are you losing weight in those areas? Then it's most likely fat. It's a long-winded, but it's kind of an educational component as well, because it's a big misnomer. Acute versus chronic. Yeah.
It really is. And the whole reason that we as runners want to be fat adaptive is because we want to use fat as fuel. Why is it that we want to use fat as fuel versus the carbs that we have consumed just before the run?
Sure. Great question. The main reason why you would want to become fat adapted is because fat is an almost unlimited fuel source. So we have like 80,000, 60,000, 80,000. We have lots and lots of calories, days worth of fat that we can tap into very easily. We have finite limited amounts of carbohydrate. So we store that carbohydrate in our muscle as glycogen. We can store it in the liver. That's actually going to play a little bit of a role. So we have a small amount of that stored carb. So if we can be more dependent at higher intensities, at a higher pace, burning more fat instead of carbohydrate, the theory would be we should be able to last longer, and we can be less reliant on consuming dietary, what we call exogenous, coming from outside the body. We can be less reliant on needing to drink different, sports drinks, gels, goos, things like that during our runs.
Okay, got it. So that's the reason we're talking about this. We're not looking at this from a perspective of weight loss. And so with that, looking at the nutritionists online and listening to what is said, there's two big trends in the running nutrition. One is that you're being pushed to eat carbs before every single run. And then the others, like yourself, is more training your body to use fat more efficiently. So could you maybe explain the core difference between these two philosophies?
Yeah. So again, here's where you have correlation does not mean causation, and you have theory versus practical, like theory versus practice. The idea of the theories, and I've been in countless talks where I've been educating, I've been giving workshops, presentations, I've done big, the great carb debate at this ACSM conference, things like that. And most of what everyone is going to talk about, you have to eat carbohydrate before every run. It's to give you energy. There's two things potentially wrong with that. 100%, if you eat carbohydrate, it will give you energy. If you put glucose, which is the carbohydrate whatever we eat, it's going to convert it into almost exclusively glucose, so sugar. If you put sugar into the blood, the muscles will burn it. So yes, by eating before any run, any event, you're going to provide energy. The misnomer, actually there's three things. The big misnomer with that is a lot of very reputable individuals, coaches, nutritionists, doctors, PhDs, they are going to advocate one aspect of that. Well, you need to supply all that energy so that you can spare that glycogen that's in your muscles. And that is wrong. That is 100% false. It's like the big thing that I tout in every podcast I go on. The latest edition of Dr. William Kramer's Exercise Physiology textbook, I was a big editor with that. I got them to change that in the textbook. We do not spare muscle glycogen by consuming dietary carb. There are tons and tons of seminal studies done by Yuke and Droop, done by the best in the world, giving 200, 300 grams an hour, and we don't see a sparing of muscle glycogen. You're going to break down that glycogen in your muscle based on contraction, the intensity. Once it hits a certain intensity, that's when your body will use it. So yes, we're providing you with fuel before you run, but it's not sparing muscle glycogen. I think the big misnomer, the really third one, that's like the big crux, you know, like the thorn in my side when I hear it, is this idea of the difference, and I've talked about this on your podcast before, training versus competition. They are going to say you need that fuel to perform. One, depending on the intensity and the volume that you're doing, that's completely false, especially if your run is an hour or less. If you ate adequately the night before or the day before, your muscle glycogen should be totally fine. And up to an hour, easily, you're 100% good on a muscle glycogen. You're not going to run out of it. So we're not sparing it, and you don't really need it. This is why even Gatorade doesn't really recommend carbohydrate intake for any exercise bout less than, I think it's like 45 minutes. If you do, it's psychological. There's no physiological benefit to consuming carbohydrate before even a lift, if your lift is less than an hour. So like you're going to lift, you know, and try and improve your run, your power output. So it's just, I constantly hear the fourth, if I had to throw a fourth one, is they're saying you need to eat before your runs because if you don't have that energy, you're going to, where's your body going to get this? And I've heard this, and I've only corrected one person just because I felt obligated, and then others, I don't know. If you don't eat before a run, your body doesn't have energy, which is also false. Where is your body going to get it from? And they say muscle. And that couldn't be further from the truth. So just disclaimer here, you will not waste muscle and burn muscle if you don't eat before a run. You can go out on a 3-hour run. You are not going to waste your muscles. Unless you are a burn victim or you start going out and you're running, you know, past your marathon, you're doing an ultra and you're eating nothing, your body will not burn more energy from protein.
Okay. So taking a step back, because that's a lot.
Yeah.
What is the reason why some nutritionists then recommend to eat carbs if your muscle glycogen doesn't get spared? And then is there anything that we can do to spare it? Because obviously, you know, when we have these intense runs, we do take gels and hope that we have, I believe, more glycogen left in our muscles in, for example, a marathon.
Yeah. So can we spare muscle glycogen? Here's where you get into the idea of if you become fat adapted, you will be able to burn more fat at a higher intensity, which means you'll rely less on carbohydrate. So the theory there would be you would spare some muscle glycogen because you're using more fat towards the total contribution of energy in your runs. Once you get to 90%, 85, 90%, you know, VO2 max intensity, like once you get above lactate threshold, which is going to be a little lower than that, there's no doubt, even if you are a ketogenic, you're eating less than 50 grams a day, you're still going to burn some carbohydrate above that intensity. And that carb is going to almost come exclusively from glycogen. So can we spare it? Sure. When someone becomes very, very fat adapted, I think paying attention to trying to spare glycogen is, you're going down the wrong road, in my opinion, based on everything I've read. The flip side of that is we want to make sure that we have enough glycogen. We want to make sure that we have enough energy. That's why we supplement. That's why we take the gels and the goos. it's not necessarily because we're hoping that we have some glycogen left at mile 20, right? Everyone talks about like either the proverbial wall or the physiological wall, like, whether that actually, we want to try and preserve. Your body doesn't preserve glycogen. You can either slow down to try and preserve it, or the reason that we hit, besides the psychological component, and we've talked about that before on your podcast, if you want to continue to run at the intensity and pace at mile 16, 20 towards the tail end of the marathon, that's where you then get into, well, you have to supplement with dietary carbohydrate. Why? Because your muscle needs X amount of calories per minute when you're running at blank pace. It's going to get that from muscle glycogen, and then it has to get it from somewhere else. It can get it from stored fats in the muscle. It can get it from taking sugar up from the blood, which is going to be a primary source. It can take some fatty acids up from the blood. So the big thing about, which kind of gets to the point of the talk, is forget about glycogen sparing. We can talk about glycogen replenishment, things like that. But the real end of the equation that I think listeners are really interested in is, other than the glycogen, because you can't really modify that. As long as you consume enough carb throughout a day leading into a big race or an event or a really long workout, you're going to have that glycogen. If you're going out and running a long distance, if you're going to go out and do interval work, if you're going to go out and actually, today's race day, you're going to want to consume dietary carbohydrates to maintain blood sugar so the brain stays happy. And the reason that you have to maintain it is because the muscle will continually keep pulling that sugar out of the bloodstream. Herein lies, and I'm going off on a tangent, but this is super important. Herein lies why you want to become fat adapted. If you are more fat adapted, you don't have to drink and eat as much of that goo and the gels, because you're burning less total carbohydrate at that same pace. So you don't have to consume as much dietary carbohydrate. Does that make sense? It should preserve the energy. It potentially should reduce, because you'll have much less crashes if you're much more fat adapted, and it should decrease your reliance on dietary, sugar consumption, especially later in the race or in a long, long run.
Okay. It does make a lot of sense. And it also makes a lot of sense now thinking back. I went to Kenya this year and I watched these athletes running their hour-long runs, which, for them, it's a half marathon. And nobody ever ate anything unless it was a Sunday morning work or a Saturday morning workout where they were going marathon pace. Nobody ever ate anything before their run until after they were done. So that makes a lot of sense too, now that I'm thinking about it.
What's even more fascinating in that population is they habitually eat a higher carbohydrate diet. But again, this is where you get into like theory and practice and sort of mistaking, not seeing the forest through the trees, where training versus competition, they're periodizing. They are running specific runs in a fasted state or in a lower carbohydrate state. And they're doing that for specific reasons, because the body will adapt in a beneficial way afterwards. There are tremendous physiological benefits to doing certain runs or workouts in a low carb or a fasted state.
Yes, and then come race day, they have their fueling station every 3 miles, every 5K. They're drinking it. And I think, when they do it in Kenya, obviously it's in practice, how to grab the bottles and everything. But then when they have their marathons here and they're going super fast, they eat a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess with that, it makes sense that we as amateur leisure runners, we consume food a lot of times also just to practice and see what our bodies can handle. But do you think it's because of the running industry and products that so many people, so many nutritionists are in that trend where they're pushing for you to fuel every run, even if they're shorter runs?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of two things. One, there's no doubt there's a big industry push behind things. And then two, I think there's just become an indoctrination of this is the way it's always been done. This is the way that we always think. I'll have countless athletes that I've worked with, and they're going to different places, and they're mentioning to their coach or their strength coach or their nutritionist, blah, 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 I didn't eat before this morning's workout, before this morning's lift, and they like have, a hissy fit, and they go crazy. And it's like, show me your data to support why they needed before this lift to eat. Less than an hour, and there's many lifts that are an hour or less, and then you get into a lot of runs that are an hour or less, and it's even Gatorade is not recommending. So here's where you get into this. You're saying, where does this come from? Again, even Gatorade is showing. If someone goes out, and a lot of people are going out, I'm going to go and do a 30-minute run, I'm going to do a 45-minute run, even Gatorade is saying you do not need carbohydrate for that run. That is different than should you eat before? Should you have breakfast beforehand? So, right, those are the two different things. Even in the stance where it's, I don't see them consuming anything during the workout or during that run, should they eat something beforehand? My answer to most questions is it depends. Is this like a race day, super tempo, interval workout? Yeah, you might want to eat something beforehand. If it's a long, slow run, if it's like a recovery run, things like that, the literature is showing no, you can definitely do fasted or extremely low carb, runs or workouts in that state.
Okay. And so I guess then with that, we've already kind of established that the one run that you do want to fuel definitely is your race. But what about these workouts that you do during the week? Is it helpful at all to do your tempos and your intervals not fueled? Or should you more try to actually hit the paces and fueling will help you for that? Or will fueling even help you with that?
So again, the answer is it depends, because we might recommend both. Part of it is, when is race day? So if race day is within the next 3 weeks, I would never recommend that you try a fasted interval or race pace or like tempo run workout, like without eating a breakfast or even something beforehand. The idea would be, the further out it is, the more you can try those high interval, sprint days, hill days, stuff like that. Again, if they're less than an hour, here's where you get into this. Well, yeah, it's really high intensity and all these different things. And it's like, yeah, but those workouts aren't lasting much longer than an hour. Many of them are only lasting 30 minutes. So physiologically, you shouldn't need to consume any carbohydrate beforehand. And again, remember we were talking about like, fat adapted versus fat loss. We have to take into context. I'm assuming that most of the time you're eating properly. You're eating enough calories, you got enough sleep, like the day before those workouts, you got enough, energy, and you topped off your glycogen stores. So you should be okay. Would it be beneficial to do some of those intervals? Sure. Would I recommend it if I don't want you to be fasted before every run? Well, I'm going to recommend consume something before those interval, hill workouts, your race pace runs, things like that, more than I will your long, slow distance, unless you're going out for a few hours. And even then it's still, teeter something in an hour into it. Does that make sense? But with that, the reason why we would not want you to only stay fasted before all of your runs is because on race day, if you're not going to do that, well, then you're introducing something on race day that you didn't train. So we want your gut, and we want your digestion, and we want your brain and all the hormones and the satiation and the sensitivities of what this feels like to have all this during this type of workout. We want you to get acclimated to that before you actually go and race it. So there's a training aspect, like a nutritional training aspect.
Yeah. That's so important. Practicing things before your big day. And then I guess we've already talked about it but race day fueling, you highly recommend it. How does it differ? Say, for example, if I did my marathon training cycle, fat adapted, until, the last couple of weeks, and then it's marathon day, versus my friend who is the exact same as I am, who did not do that and fueled everything. How does my carb consumption during the marathon differ from hers? And maybe you can talk about the sparing glycogen in that sense a little bit.
Yeah. So I forget what is it? Your miles may vary, YMMV. You read all the time. Like people will write on Reddit and all these blogs and forums like YMMV. Your miles may vary. We can see a lot of stuff in the lab, but at the end of the day, nothing beats you trying things out. The theory and really what should happen would be you versus your friend. Let's say you're both similar weight, similar fitness, similar pace. She's high carb for everything, doing the same workouts, but you are, teetering in and tapering in, like super low carb or fasted runs. The idea would be, and the literature is pretty conclusive on this, that during the marathon, if you're both trying to run the same time, you'll both be running at the same pace. You will be burning less carbohydrate than she will. So she will be more reliant on carbohydrate throughout that race. The idea would be later on, it's not necessarily glycogen, because the theory, and there's not a lot of literature on like those specific studies that look at, there's tons of stuff that look at glycogen depleted and we just consume carb, but they're very regimented. It's like every 15 minutes, we're going to give you a bolus of 30 grams of carbohydrate and see how your time trial performance, look at glycogen breakdown. To my knowledge, I haven't read a study that is going to have you fasted, someone else fasted, and now you're going into the race, you're both running, and it's going to look to see, well, how does your muscle glycogen vary 20 miles into the race? The theory would be you are going to overall, well, again, I'm very hard pressed to say glycogen sparing is a thing. I've just went down the rabbit hole, and 98 out of every 9,998 out of every 10,000 papers and studies indicate you do not spare muscle glycogen. Even for our faster study, we had the best ultra runners in the world, 10 high carb, 10 ketogenic. Pre and post a 3-hour treadmill run, we did muscle biopsies. They both had the same glycogen to start, and they both had the same glycogen to finish. So a lot of it is going to boil down to your fuel availability and the fuel supply in the blood to the muscle. So you should need to consume less carbohydrate per hour than she should. That's like the main, if I would recommend something, it's, well, you should be able to get away with the same performance at 30 grams an hour versus her 45 or 60.
But then what if I take the same amount? Will that make me more efficient then?
It shouldn't.
Okay.
Because that's the interesting part, where all those overfeeding carbohydrate studies looking at 200 grams an hour, you're not sparing muscle glycogen. Almost all the literature is showing 60 grams an hour is really where the world is like capping out. That once you go above it, yes, there are studies to show there is a performance benefit in a time trial, things like that. But there are just as many other studies showing, no, we showed no difference at 90 grams per hour versus 60 grams per hour. The problem that exists in the literature is, and this is very true for our fasted and low carb research, is they will give you and her are doing these different diets, and you're doing that for a few weeks, 2 weeks, and now all of a sudden they're going to have you both race, and they're going to say, oh, your performance didn't go up. And it's like, well, you've only done it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But most of the literature, to my knowledge, no, you would not see a benefit going from 30 to that 60 grams if you are in that more fat adapted state.
Okay. So then you, as an expert in this, what is your recommendation? What is the benefit of really running fat adaptive? Does it really matter? And then for people who are interested in trying it out, who's a good candidate and who's not a good candidate?
I mean, if you feel amazing, I'm probably not going to ask you to try anything unless you come to me and you say, hey, I'm running a 4-hour marathon. I've run 10 of them. I can't break 4. I want to break 4. I've run 10. I can't qualify for Boston. I want to qualify for Boston. Well, okay, let's try something different. So I would almost recommend it for anyone to try it out. Depends on how many marathons you run a year. Try anything to find out if it works for you. You know, what's the benefit of it? I mean, the number one benefit is the most of the literature supports if you are doing random runs and things like that, people throughout their day and even during a lot of those runs, they feel as though they have a great amount of energy. And a big part of that reason is you're much less likely and prone to crashing, like sugar crashes, if you're not just pounding sugar throughout the day and even during those runs. So there's that aspect. And then a big part is you're less reliant on buying all this product, whether money is an issue or not. So the main benefit of becoming fat adapted is less reliance on buying supplements. As someone who gets a lot of supplements for free, random research studies, I've tried a lot of different things out. It's annoying to consume. I'm going to consume this, I'm going to consume that, I'm going to consume that. So, I mean, you might say, well, that's not a real benefit. And it's like, all right, well, talk to me after you've cut out, or you're taking, 5 different supplements throughout the day and you're dependent upon it, and you can drop those and you feel the same. I think the other thing is to bring up, by you becoming less dependent on buying and consuming products throughout the day, before your runs, during your runs, even if it doesn't improve your performance, we just saved you money and now you don't have to consume these things. Like that alone, everyone's looking for, well, why will I see an improvement in my marathon time? Maybe not, but everything we've talked about is performance so far. There are definitely health benefits to being metabolically flexible and fat adapted. They're tremendous from a cardiovascular standpoint. Fasted runs, the improvement in inflammatory responses. You get into everyone's going to produce. You don't have to be on a keto diet. If you just do one long run, if you go out for an hour or an hour and a half, 2-hour run, you're going to produce more ketone bodies than you and I have at rest. We all have ketone bodies in our blood. Those are signal molecules. They're going to trigger your mitochondria. They're going to trigger your brain, nervous system, cardiovascular system. There's a lot of benefits from a health standpoint to becoming fat adapted.
Can you talk about a few of those more? Because I was just trying to look at it from a fueling perspective, and I never even thought about asking you all these other benefits about that just in regular life.
Yeah. So fuel partitioning, your body's ability of, if you introduce high carbohydrate, your body's tolerance for that is going to be higher when you mix in fasted or low carb runs. So by becoming more fat adapted, your tolerance for, you just ate a lot of sugar, okay, your body's going to be able to switch. Now, when that sugar goes away, your body very quickly can shift back to fat. If someone is if they're not very fat adapted, meaning they're not metabolically flexible, they're not going to be able to shift when they introduce a lot of these, dietary sources. So if you eat a lot of sugar and fat, someone who's not fat adapted or metabolically flexible, their body doesn't know what to do with that as much. And their body's going to store it just like our bodies if we're fat adapted, but their body is now going to store it ectopically. You're going to start storing that fat in places that you don't want to store it. Now you're going to increase visceral fat, which increases, atherosclerotic plaque development. It increases inflammation, things like that. The other aspect will be, if you're not fat adapted, as you teeter, it's funny because we're talking about becoming fat adapted, but then someone who's fat adapted typically can handle carbohydrates very well. So an individual who's not, they're not going to be able to. And one, they're very reliant on those carbohydrates, but two, by continually consuming more of those carbohydrates, you can induce, insulin resistance and things like that.
Super interesting. Yeah, thank you for talking about this. I feel like I learned a lot, and our listeners probably did too, because it's such a broad topic, and all we know out there is that we have these split nutritionists giving information as to whether to fuel or not fuel every run. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if we had to give a recommendation, if someone was saying, all right, because my word of 2025 is action, right? David Goggins always says we have too many theorists, not enough practitioners. It's like, all right, what's the takeaway? If you want to put this into action, the idea would be hopefully you don't have a marathon coming up within, let's say, 10 weeks, minimum like 8 weeks. But if you're like beyond 10 weeks out, give it a try. First thing would be just on a random, not even a long, but a slower run, try to not eat anything that morning. You can drink water. If you're not going out for more than like an hour, you probably don't really need to drink electrolytes. You could drink some water, but try it on one of those runs. Start implementing it maybe 2 days a week. We probably would never recommend it, 7 days a week, because you're hopefully doing some interval works. But if you're someone going out, hey, I'm training for a marathon and I'm not really doing a lot of speed work and things like that, you could probably do a lot of your runs in the fasted state. And you would see some great benefits from it.
Any downfalls or downsides to this when somebody is getting used to it from coming from high carb? Are they going to feel sluggish? How is that going to feel to suddenly run without fueling beforehand?
Yeah, you could become sluggish. You probably, if you feel sluggish on a longer, and this is where when we say long, you can't do miles. You can look at distance, but should you feel sluggish by shifting to a fasted state before, an hour run? You shouldn't, because physiologically your body has what it needs. A lot of that is going to be psychological. Or that first run, yes, maybe you will, because your body is trained and your muscles are waiting for that pre-exercise meal to supply them with energy during that run, regardless of what that run is. So 100%, you might feel some sluggishness when you first implement it. The big limitations of like any of the, if you want to go and do like some sprints, let's say you're going out and you're on a road or you're on the trail and all of a sudden you hit a hill, and you're like 3 miles in, 4 miles in, and you want to like run up that hill, you might not have that energy as much if it's later on in the run. So, but do not confuse everything that we've said today with a caloric deprivation diet. What we are not recommending is person A and person B. You and your friend, she's consuming high carb before every run as a meal, and she's consuming carb during her run. You are running fasted, and you're not consuming during your run. Both of you are eating the same amount of calories during the day. You're still compensating later in the day with those calories. So the benefits aren't from cutting out calories, it's from doing your exercise bout in the fasted state. Because when you do that, it's going to trigger all these chemicals to be released, and it's going to tell your muscles to adapt after that run, build more mitochondria, be better at transporting fat, be better at, doing all these things. So we are not saying caloric deprivation.
Perfect. Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate your time with this. And if somebody wants to look you up and find you, how can they do that?
They can shoot me an email, pat@patdavitt.com. Social media, I'm Patrick Davitt, PhD, Instagram, TikTok. I'd be happy to answer. Most of my social media is just me walking and running in the woods, giving motivational quotes and things like that. So, but occasionally I'll drop some nuggets about nutrition or sleep or things like that. But yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions that they had. It's always a pleasure. I love talking about this. I know I could stay on for hours and hours and hours, but we got to cut it short. And it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate every time I'm on. Hopefully, if there's anything that's not clear, definitely reach out to Letty or definitely reach out to myself.
Perfect. Thank you so much.